This is the Freeheel Life Podcast, episode number 22. I'm your host, Josh Madsen, coming at you from the Freeheel Life Shop in Salt Lake City, Utah. And I'm rolling solo today, people. Good to be back. Always a refreshing time to sit down at the old shop and do this podcast because I love being able to connect with you guys out there and share some ideas. And appreciate everybody that's been writing in. I know there's been a lot more time at home, so I think people are having a chance to check things out and catch up on some old episodes too, so I appreciate that. So nothing really going on in the newsroom and notes this week. The only main thing is coming into May, we're going to be taking a little break from social media, a little social media vacation. And from the Telemark skier and Freeheel Life stuff, just so we can kind of better prepare for fall and winter and make sure we have all the good stuff for the actual season. We'll pop on there occasionally. I know I'm still trying to get, a couple things sold in the shop. We're going to be selling some demo skis this week, and so keep an eye out for that. And doing a little bit of catch up on that. But other than that, we're going to take a little break and it should be good. So I'm stoked about that and get a little refresher for the fall and winter stuff. So today's episode is going to be kind of different. I'm going to be talking about creating our own industry. And this is going to be more or less like a community type podcast around the business of telemark. So it might not be for everybody, but I want you to check it out if you are. These ideas are like really central to the concepts I share with my employees here at the Freeheel Life and with people that are close to me in telemark. And I want to take the opportunity to share them with you guys here and on the show and just kind of share some of the ideas. The podcast may or may not be for you, like I was saying, but I'm actually kind of curious to see who this resonates with and who it does not. So we'll just call this one a little bit of an experiment. So make sure this is a good one. Right on in. Hopefully it makes you feel one way or the other. I think that's what's most interesting to me about what we do with Telemark is, it's still pretty relatively small. But I actually like when people sometimes obviously don't see the same way is maybe one of my ideas or someone else's ideas. I think that's the healthiest thing we can do right now is have open discourse and just have more involvement with people. So that's hopefully this one will kind of churn up some feelings inside of you. As cheesy as that sounds, hopefully it'll get you thinking about something new. So a quick history on why I arrived at these ideas and why I think they're important to share with those that are willing to listen. I started working in the telemark world around 2003. And first thing we need to do is define what I mean by working. I was a highly qualified dishwasher at the Rustler Lodge at Alta. So that's where this kind of all started. I'd actually done some telemark ski racing previous to that, and that was amazing. And shout out to all the race folks out there. A lot of people don't realize, but there is up to World Cup level telemark racing in telemark, which is pretty awesome, and it's super fun to watch. But I did a little bit of racing for a few years, and then I was washing dishes up at Alta in 2003. Best shift ever, 4 p.m. shift. So I got to do some skiing and all the free beer I could drink afterwards. So it was a good winter for sure. But during that time, kind of the course of my life kind of changed. I was introduced to a photographer named Beth Lockhart, and Beth was shooting photos of my friend Sarah Clemenson, who was a telemark skier in the area. And she was like, hey, you should come out and you can shoot some photos with me. And I was like, okay, I don't know what that means. But there I was, and she outfitted me with this funny orange getup and pant and jacket combo. And there I was, like, shooting photos. I didn't know what I was doing. But she's like, yeah, you're a pretty good tele skier. You should get sponsored. And I'm like, okay, I don't really know what that means. I'm washing dishes at Alta. Like, I don't really know what that means. But she introduced me to this great gentleman named Ted McGinnis at Carhu Skis. And thanks to Ted sent me a couple pairs of skis and was like, here you go, keep shooting photos with Beth. And I was like, okay, that sounds like a fun opportunity. So that basically started kind of this whole behind the scenes look at Telemark. And I'm so glad it was kind of back in that era. Telemark was pretty happening kind of in the early 2000s. We had just come out of the 80s and 90s where backcountry skiing literally grew through telemark skiing. So by the early 2000s, it was kind of a hot item, so to speak. And Carhu was a really cool company. It had a lot of history through the 80s and into the 90s. And so I didn't really realize that at the time. And I think looking back, I'm like, man, it was really cool that I was able to work with them. So anyways, point being, from 2003 to 2009, I ended up working with a bunch of companies as a sponsored athlete / glorified ski bum. And when I say sponsored athlete, I always like to point out, think of it like a poor painter, it's the starving artist gig. And that, especially back then, that's what it was. I mean, you weren't making a living. You always had a second job. But it was sort of like if a painter, somebody came to the painter and said, I want you to paint more. I'm going to give you some paint brushes and canvases and paints so that you don't have to spend as much time earning money to get the resources you need to make beautiful paintings. So, I mean, basically that's what it was, right? Like, someone's like, I'm going to give you skis, and I was able to get some bindings later on and boots. And the less I had to work to get that stuff, the more time I could spend. But my obligations were, all right, you got to go shoot photos and make sure you look good in the magazines, and go shoot clips for movies if you could get into those. And so I did those kinds of things. And that's kind of a story in and of itself. But so basically that whole time period, 03 to 09, I worked as this glorified ski bum / sponsored athlete with companies like Columbia Sportswear, Smith Optics, Volley Manufacturing, Scarpa North America, Carhu, Rosignol Telemark, and a few others. So the reason I wanted to list some of these off is to give you guys an idea of two things. Number one, a few of these companies that were involved with Telemark during this time period, if you didn't tele back then, you might not even know about some of those. And then number two, give you an idea of which of those companies are currently involved in 2020 or still even exist today. So a few other notable companies probably from that time, if you were telemarking, that obviously need mention. One of them I always think is interesting to look back on was Nike ACG, which was kind of an offshoot. They used to make outerwear. That was a good one. It was brief, but they were there. Nike was involved. K2 Skis, obviously classic company involved in the 90s, early 2000s. Fisher had Telemark skis. Black Diamond, G3, Atomic, and there are surely many others I am not thinking of. But those are definitely some of the bigger ones, and obviously, recognizable, bigger brands that had Telemark specific lines of skis or somehow were involved in Telemark, as it were, during that period of time. So that was kind of that 03 to 09. I was around all of these companies, and in the wintertime when we were skiing or doing movie projects or whatnot. So come around 2009, I took a job as the editor-in-chief at Telemark Skier magazine. And this was when it was in print. We did 2 issues at that point. And I was also a movie maker. So I produced 4 Telemark specific movies during that time, toured them all around the United States. I used to do 50 city tours in 90 days every fall into the early part of the winter, and just put the hammer down, and it was amazing. I got to meet many of you out there. Hopefully you're still telemarketing, maybe even checking this out, because I know some of you are for sure. But so kind of during the 2009 to 2012, this was a cool time, because I just spent like this whole, chunk of time in the early 2000s up to that point, kind of behind the scenes, talking more about skis and promoting Telemark, and it was really more about that, like developing skis and what kind of skis we should use. And Karhu was a fantastic company to work with at the time in the early 2000s, because we were Karhu was owned by a company called Track Sports USA, and they owned Karhu and Line skis. So we got to share a lot of the molds of those skis, and man, there was some awesome stuff that came out back then. So that was kind of cool to see all of that era. And then by 2009, to kind of move into the media side of it, all of a sudden I had this opportunity to work with many of these companies I was talking about, but like in a different capacity. And obviously doing movies and magazines, I'm working more in terms of advertising in the products I was making. I'm writing, we're creating articles in the magazine, and you don't need, but the format that we had was advertising. So you'd had ads from those companies go into the magazine, and also we would have sponsors for the movie, and sometimes we would crisscross those to offset the cost of printing the magazines and producing the movies. It also to note that many of like those companies I was mentioning might not exist any longer, or they have pivoted to not wanting to be Telemark specific. So some of the ones I mentioned in the early 2000s, many of those companies actually already started to pivot out of Telemark by the time I was doing the movies and the magazines. And so that was kind of one point I just wanted to point out, is even in that time frame, things were changing quite a bit. And it was just kind of a changing landscape. So again, why is this important? The reason I wanted to share it is so that there's kind of like historic facts and context to this whole thing that we can use to help kind of illustrate what I'm about to explain to you guys, and the main topic of the podcast today, and that is, does Telemark have its own industry, and does it need one? And this, by the start of 2012, I finally kind of started asking myself this very question. And honestly, I don't know if it was really like I was on this journey to to ask myself this question. I think it was just because of so many experiences that I had from 2003 to 2012. It legitimately was just kind of a question that started popping up. And honestly, sadly, it probably came into my mind a lot because of things that I was seeing, both from that athlete experience, that glorified ski bum experience, and also seeing it from more of a media standpoint, and how important that stuff, movies and magazines, were to those companies to promote their products. Because when you really think about it, especially with the media stuff, it was an incredibly changing landscape of time. Social media and stuff had really come in, and people could really, you really started seeing like there wasn't as much of a need for some of that stuff to get your products out to the people. And like I was saying, some of those companies didn't even exist anymore, or they had like pivoted to other things. So part of asking myself this question kind stemmed from three things that I've kind of identified. Why did I start asking myself, do we need our own industry? And the first thing was right off the bat was people were saying Telemark was dead. And if you listen to my podcast, one of the very first podcasts I ever did, I sort of answer part of that question is Telemark actually dead? And kind of get into that. So if you haven't listened to that one, definitely go to the back catalog, listen to that episode. And, this is back in 2012. I'm starting to hear this. So that was the first thing that kind of started concerning me. The second thing that started concerning me was Telemark equipment and rentals were becoming more difficult to find. And that's kind of what I touched on that earlier podcast was Telemark really wasn't dying, but it was hard to find this stuff. And so people's perception of it was, oh, well, no one's doing this anymore. So the difficulty in finding the product started concerning me too. And when I first started seeing that, I was just like, this is bizarre. I mean, it really was kind of strange at the time. And then the third thing was there were very few companies that wanted to align themselves with Telemark only products, media, etc. I was kind of hinting on that. It's like it was around this time that people that I thought were diehard Telemark skiers, or companies that I thought were diehard Telemark companies, they were starting to get a little bit kind of freaked out at the idea that someone would call them a Telemark ski company or a Telemark company of any sort. And this wasn't just one specific example. I'm not going to name any particular brand or anything, but there was very specific experiences that I had where, and multiple businesses, where you could see that they had built a pretty incredible base of Telemark support, and telemarketers were diehard for them. And then it got uncomfortable because they realized that people perceived them to be a Telemark brand or company or whatever, however you want to think about it. And it was around this time, I mean, that was a really interesting shift to watch because that affected a lot of other things. And it got me kind of thinking back then, like, of course, me, the guy with Telemark tattooed on his knuckles, right? Like I'm thinking, why wouldn't you want to pigeonhole yourself? So I get it. This is all perspective, again, this is my experience with this stuff and my opinion. So that's why I kind of said this is sort of an experiment, and I'm interested to see how other people feel as we kind of go along. So those were these three things that kind of started happening to me. And so now I'm thinking the word industry, it's a big word. It gets thrown around a lot, especially in the outdoor world, right? The outdoor industry. I always thought that was kind of funny because it sounds, we use that word a lot in the outdoor space. And I guess it was at this point I kind of started thinking like, well, to me, how do I define industry then? Because I'm kind of curious now with all these three things specifically that I'm seeing. Telemark's dead. I can't find any equipment anymore if I'm just an average Joe consumer. And there's few companies that even want to use the word Telemark because they're afraid of it. So how do you define industry? Well, this was kind of when I started going down that road. And this is what industry means to me, Josh Madsen. Okay. And basically it's this. Like manufacturing businesses that specifically build and support a group of people with their products. And in turn, the consumer buys these products and helps these said businesses maintain supporting the group by improving on the products and the services. Okay. So that was my attempt at making this industry definition. So in layman's terms, in Telemark terms, because that's obviously what I'm actually qualified to talk about. In Telemark terms, Telemark companies make Telemark products. Telemark skiers buy those Telemark products. And the Telemark companies continue to keep making more Telemark products and so on. Key point being, the money stays within Telemark companies and people. So where your money goes is important. And it was around this time as I kind of defined it that way, I started kind of looking around and started asking myself kind of the number one question. Well, what makes a Telemark company? And why is that even important? I mean, is it important? And so I was kind of making these hypotheticals in my own mind. And just because of my own experiences and the things I was involved in, and I start thinking, well, what makes a Telemark company? And this kind of took me back to when I first noticed people saying Telemark is dead. And so for me, that actually ended up being a good thing, because that's how I was going to define a Telemark company. And it's pretty simple. I started asking myself, if Telemark is dead, meaning there are no people that need the products, then your company is dead. And that, when I remember the first time I kind of started thinking in terms of that, I was like, that's perfect. Because if Telemark is actually dead, like there are no people, or not even to be so drastic, but there's so few people that you can't, there aren't people to buy the products any longer. Your company is going to die. Or, I mean, that's the most drastic, right? Like you could argue like, well, you downsize, and and I agree with that too. I mean, I'll get to that later, but the idea that company size based on the amount of people that are going to buy your stuff, absolutely, that ratio should exist. But for all intents and purposes, it was fun because all of a sudden I'm going, okay, I'm a Telemark, just me as a Telemark skier. I started asking myself, well, which company, if Tele's really dead, which companies are going to die if none of us actually exist and we're all just a figment of our imagination, then what companies are dead? And so that's kind of where I started. So examples of Telemark companies as of right now, and forgive me if I miss any, I'm just going to throw a couple out there. The first one always off the top of my head, 22 Designs. So if I put it against this concept of, if Telemark is dead, your company is dead, 22 Designs 100% fits in that category. They only make products for Telemark skiers. And so if there are 0 Telemark skiers out there, or so few that are buying their products, that company is going to go away. Others, Bishop, my own Freeheel Life Shop, Bluebird Day Gear, the M Equipment, these are actually true Telemark companies, 100%. If people don't Telemark, or very few, they go away and they disappear. And so here's the point I want to bring to you to ponder. Here I'm going to list a few companies that are not Telemark companies, but make Telemark equipment. And little disclaimer, I'm not trying to pick on these guys, but I want to use these examples because they're right there. And I'll tell you why they're incredibly important, obviously, afterwards. But I want you to just follow me here for a minute in terms of kind of ponder this concept based on that idea that we just went over. Scarpa is not a Telemark company, okay? So Scarpa is a footwear company that makes Telemark boots. But Scarpa is a footwear company. They make footwear for alpine climbing, rock climbing, approach shoes, hiking boots, alpine alpine touring ski boots. So they are a footwear company that makes a Telemark product. Okay. But they're not a Telemark company. Okay. Volet Manufacturing is not a Telemark company. It is a backcountry company. They make backcountry products. And those backcountry products include Telemark bindings. They make backcountry skis. They make backcountry avalanche shovels. They make split boards. Okay. And Telemark is a piece of that kind of product line that they offer. Third example, Rotofella. Rotofella is a Nordic ski company, a Nordic binding company that offers Telemark bindings. And, but you know, the larger portion of their business is Nordic bindings. So I know it's going to rub some of you the wrong way, because you really, deep down inside, I think there's a lot of people that want to believe these companies are Telemark companies. And to their defense, in most cases, there are incredible legacy products in those lineups. And there's a lot of love for Telemark. I mean, all of us know Scarpa loves Telemark. If it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have plastic Telemark boots. Volet, incredible innovations through the 80s. The original plate binding, VP2, if you want to go there for some weird history, like an actual plate binding with a lot of, I don't even know how to describe that one. We'll get into that one later. I mean, they even had a step-in cable binding at one point, they've always loved Telemark. Rotofella, same thing. The original Rat Trap. I mean, this goes back all the way to the Nordic days, and they, super Telemark 3-pin binding. They created the NTN platform. These companies have incredible contributions to Telemark. But the point of doing this exercise is just the reality of things, that if Telemark died, these three companies are going to live on. They're going to sell other products that are going to keep them afloat. If Telemark died, Rotofella is going to keep making Nordic products. If Telemark died, Volet's going to keep making skis. They're going to keep making shovels and split boards and split board bindings and all sorts of stuff. Scarpa, same thing. They're going to move on. So they're going to keep making other products. So the whole point of just kind of illustrating that is to show you guys kind of what I was realizing. I remember the first time I started thinking about it in this light, and I was like, that is so interesting that we as telemarketers sort of exist in this in-between zone, because there is a ski industry and there's a Nordic industry, and there's a backcountry industry, and we kind of float in between it. And a lot of it's probably because of where we came from in the 80s and 90s, early 2000s, a lot of, obviously the backcountry grew through Telemark and whatnot. But why I think this is why this might be a problem is, I think a lot of people think if we get these big alpine companies to recognize how badass Telemark skiing is, won't they realize how many Telemark skiers use their stuff and get involved? And this is so common over the years. I've heard this. And part of why I wanted to do this podcast was just look, if you totally disagree with 100% of everything I say, that's cool. But at least I got it off my chest and I'll feel better. But honestly, I can't tell you how often I hear that if we just get Telemark in front of these companies that are in the ski industry, that they're going to recognize how awesome Tele is and it's just going to forever change us. And so that's kind of why I was trying to set this up at the beginning and not just jump into this idea, because you probably would have shut it off already. If you haven't, awesome. But what I wanted to do was set some groundwork for this thought process at the beginning and show you that, in fact, many of these companies that people are still screaming to have them engage with us as telemark skiers, or they think they're engaged with us somehow. They were at one point. And that's, I mean, some of the biggest names in the business: Atomic, Rosignol, and, you know, you could go on and on. I mean, there's been various times where that's what was going on. Black Diamond. And I think there's, and even to the point where now there's kind of a misconception of support because of where things have been at one point. And so a couple of those examples that I think are happening right now that are kind of almost like a carryover from like back in the day is Black Diamond and Volet skis, for instance. Like, I hear this all the time at the shop, and we'll get into, like I said, not to pick on anyone specifically, but I want you guys to have specific examples that are documented, so to speak, so you can kind of understand where I'm coming from with this. So one misconception that I hear often is like, Black Diamond's a Telemark company, or Volet's a Telemark company. And that's just not the case based on the criteria that I'm talking about. And one thing I wanted to illustrate with those two, specifically Black Diamond and Volet, recently with their skis in the last 3 years, is if you've noticed, if you've followed it at all, or you've purchased some of those skis, one of the things you will notice is that they do not, like on some of their lightweight, like Volet's Hyper Series or the Black Diamond Helio, the last few years, they have a really light wood called Polonia that is almost like balsa wood, and people are trying to make super lightweight skis. And for obvious purposes, you want a lighter ski to go tour on so you don't have to haul all the weight up. Well, in that process, all of a sudden, it starts saying on these skis warranty is void if you mount a Telemark binding on there. And this was the cause of a lot of confusion with our customers. They would start coming in and they'd be like, I don't understand. Like, Black Diamond and Volet, they're Telemark companies. Like, why wouldn't they warranty a Telemark mount on their skis? And this is to illustrate that point. These skis are made for backcountry skiers using AT bindings. And, you know, especially Black Diamond, that is long gone that they have supported Telemark skiing. So let that just be said. They are not a Telemark company. Did they make incredible advances in the 80s and 90s pushing Telemark, like through like Chouinard Tua, Chouinard 3 pins? They were the original distributor of Scarpa in North America. I mean, I could go on with the great things they did. But in 2020, we all need to get a grip and just understand Black Diamond is not a Telemark company. They may have some products that are going to work great for you, and we'll get there later in this conversation. But like, they're not making skis for you as a Telemark skier, so you have to beware. Does it mean you can't buy them and use them? No. But it's not, you are not in their mind when creating stuff, okay? Volet, I love those guys. They're good friends of mine. But one of the things that when they started voiding the warranty on their skis, it was a lot because I went in there because we actually had some of those skis breaking in half. And I was like, hey, you really should just put it out there. And that these are not made for Telemark skiers. And one of the things that you'll notice on like a Hyper Series in the Volet skis is the way the mounting is done is it's specifically, you know, these lightweight skis are they're not made for the durability of slamming your knee down on them, you know, and you can imagine, if you know what balsa wood is, it's soft wood. So, and I think Volet actually is going to start. I know that they are looking at, they know so many diehard Tele people love their skis. We'll talk about why we carry those skis in our shop. Or we did this last year, and I'm sure we'll carry them next season too. But I know that they're trying, because of the use of those, they are trying to modify stuff so that Telemark skiers are getting a better use, and they can get a Hyper Series ski with the Polonia core, et cetera, et cetera. But I wanted to make those two examples because that's another one. So, that's a modern example of maybe people's perception of what a Telemark brand is and what actually is happening kind of maybe behind the scenes. So, I also want it to be said, like, these are to give you some context on past history. There was a point in time, I also thought many moons ago, that the ski industry was our industry. Like, I truly wanted to believe that. And there was a point where it made sense. Like I said, all these people were involved, especially in the early, in the 90s, 2000s. 90s are kind of different because 90s were like, you had like people were still accessing the backcountry. So backcountry growth through Telemark, like, you had a lot of really, you had Kazama and Tua, and Black Diamond was making awesome skis for telemarkers, but, it really was like backcountry use Telemark and stuff. Early 2000s was, I think, people kind of trying to get in on it, But as I explained, a lot of people got in and a lot of people got out. And, the reality of it is that Telemark was merely a line item in the budget that had many, many things above it. And when you don't understand the market of Telemark, or like I was saying in the early 2000s, a lot of people were just trying to get in because it was, it was the hot thing. But if you don't understand like the Telemark market, that line item is going to sink quicker and quicker to the bottom until it gets cut. And that is good business. So let it be known that based on how things went down, I 100% understand why people like Fisher, Atomic, all of these companies got in and snagged some market share, and then it at some point sank to the bottom because there's all sorts of other stuff they've got to focus on, and it gets cut. But the concept of making our own industry is really, yes, you need to trim. But if you're not trimming like within the Telemark sphere, you're just trying to put Telemark in the grand scheme of skiing. It's history has proved that is not a sustainable model. Like, it might work for a little bit and you might get a little bit of exposure, but ultimately you're at the risk of putting Telemark against a larger ski market, which we all know there's more alpine skiers, more average people are going to alpine ski than they are going to Telemark. But I also want to say, like, is skiing, let me back up. One thing I often say to people is that the outdoor business in general is not owned by outdoor companies any longer. And to some people out there that are listening, you might not care, and that's totally fine. But I think it's worth mentioning that, there's massive conglomerates that own these ski businesses now, and it's only going to get worse in that sense of, honestly, what it does is I think it creates a lot of disconnect from the marketplace, the buyer, and with because when you're and a lot of, it's funny because like when you really get in behind the scenes and you see who owns what, I mean, you look at the resorts right now, right? Like you have these major conglomerates like Vail Resorts, Alterra, like all this stuff. The ski companies themselves, clothing companies, are very much the same. And it doesn't really leave a whole lot of space for, smaller concepts, if you will. And so that's why I think it's dangerous if we, as Telemark skiers, we're sort of like, okay, if we get these big companies to notice us, they're going to put resources into us. Even if they did, the point is it's probably not going to last. And based on my experience the last 20 years, it's definitely not going to last. And I think that's just what I'm trying to share here is if we put too much stock into that, that's the unfortunate part about it is you get really excited because you see the potential and you get a few years down the road and then someone's like, what? Why are we doing this thing? So this really is to illustrate why it's important to have our own industry. And so the other thing I just want to mention real quick is the size. When we're talking industry, part of the reason that I try to define it for you guys what I'm talking about is because we also have to keep in mind, like when you use the word industry, it makes it sound like so big and it just sounds, it sounds like industrial, for obvious reasons. You're talking about manufacturing, making stuff, whatever. But part of the reason I think so many people have got into telemark, and like I was saying, there was a time where that was their base, and then they sort of had like panic mode and they jumped ship. To make another quick example of this is like the AT Telemark ski. Like I remember when we were at Carhu, like I was working with them, and right before I kind of moved over, there was this push where all of a sudden, this is probably around 2007 or so, somewhere around there. There was this idea that we can't just call them Telemark skis because only Telemark skiers will buy them. And so they started putting Telemark /AT skis. And that was in it, like any business, right? You want more people to have the ability to buy your skis. And so in order to make the market bigger, you change the dynamic of what you're making, and in this case, it was just basically putting the word AT next to Telemark. I get it, but when in that particular situation, and I've seen this happen with a lot of other things, when you jump ship from that, you're also changing the dynamic of where you're going to put the money once you get it. And it brings us back to the fact of size. And this was kind of what I was starting to say is the size of the business is directly determined by how many people need the product, right? And look, I always say there's two ways to go. Like if you want to grow your business, and let's talk specifically about Telemark. If you want to grow the business and you're like, I am a Telemark company, you can either jump ship from the idea that you're a Telemark company and now you're just a ski company, or you're just a backcountry company, or you're whatever company. And that's okay, because if that's your business model, I understand. And you can grow your business that way. You're going to have more access to more people in a broader range that may want to use your products. But what I always say is the other way of thinking is if you want to grow your business and you're a Telemark business and you're maxed out and you're like, man, we're only this size. Like, well, there's kind of one hard answer to that. Make more Telemark skiers. So those are the two options. You can either jump ship and say you're everybody's company now, or you can say, you know what? Like, we're a small company, and we're a small company because Telemark is small. And the only way to grow that is for us to make more Telemark skiers. And that takes you back down all those things I was saying. You have to have access to gear. You have to have access to learning. You have to have access to rentals. You have to have companies that when they make money from their products are going to put money back into research and development of those products for those people. This is the point of industry. So you kind of have to swallow that bitter pill, and, so this is my proposal of sorts. After hopefully you guys were able to follow along. My proposal is to start thinking about Telemark in terms of supporting the start of a new industry. And for you listening, that's obviously maybe a new idea and you're just like, you've never even thought about this. I mean, for me, obviously this has been something I've been thinking about for a long time. And this is just kind of an opportunity to share it with you guys and see what you think. If you're one of the ones that cares about the Telemark turn as much as I do, in my opinion, it is essential that we start thinking about creating our own industry and banding together, no matter how small it is. I think it's going to take some of us to swallow that bitter pill and go, you know what? This is actually kind of small. And you know what that means? We actually are going to have to put some work into this, and we're going to have to problem solve, and we're going to have to figure out how to produce products so that we know when people buy those products that the money is going to go back. And it's going to be hard. It's kind of it's much like the Telemark turn, everyone. If we other people want to think along these lines over the course of time, it's going to be hard, and it's going to require more thought as a consumer. And in some cases, you're not going to be able to find something that fits the criteria. In most cases right now, you're not going to be able to find any part of what's going to fit the criteria. And, I'll use Freeheel Life as an example. Like, when I opened the shop here in Salt Lake, the idea was to house, to foster a new industry. I mean, really, that was the concept. I probably have done a terrible job of telling that story, which is why I'm talking to you today, because I wanted to get it out. I wanted to explain more of the ideas behind this place, because in close proximity, it's easy to just tell the story like, oh, why did you decide to open a Telemark shop? Well, this is why. Because I wanted to give a space to house as many products as we could from these boutique brands that we could find, and make sure make sure that they had a space, for people to see them, touch them, feel them, try them, and obviously buy them. And is if you go back, like I said, Telemark's dead. I always say Telemark retail died. Well, guess what? If you're going to make a product for Telemark skiers and you don't have a place to house it, and it gets bumped off the shelf, or it doesn't even get bought by a company because now they're just a outdoor shop and they're like, well, we can't really carry Telemark. There's not that many Telemarkers. I call BS. The Telemarkers never went away. The shelf space just went away. So the idea of Freeheel Life was to give space for that, number one. So we've also tried to make stuff ourselves. Like, if we couldn't find something that fit that area, we tried to make it. And we've made a boutique line of skis a few years, handmade in Salt Lake. And, I always used to tell people, were we make mass manufacturing? No. But we sold X amount of skis. And guess what? People were like, well, what's the difference? Is it a Telemark ski? And I said, it's a Telemark ski because your money's going back to Telemark. And honestly, in 2020, that's what's happening, right? If you go buy an Alpine ski from any of the various companies out there, your money is going to Alpine skiing, whether you like it or not. So it's just redirecting where we put our money. And if we want to grow this thing, we have to have more opportunities like that. But like I said, when something doesn't fit the criteria 100%, we try to support something that's as close to the core idea that is heading in that correct direction that we're talking about of fostering an industry. Volet is a great example. The only skis we carried in the shop this year were Volet. And so many people would come in and they're like, you only carry Volet? And I'm like, Taylor, our shop manager would explain to him like the concept, and this is why we only carry that. Trying to hold true to the ideals the best we can, because we want to be able to sell you skis, but we also want to stay true to the principles that we're trying to do, and that's help foster a new space, a new industry, and hopefully we can make more of our skis in the future, or we can house other brands that are trying to do that. Like in Europe right now, there's TKS. They're trying to make their own skis. Bishop started making their own skis. These are very Telemark centric skis by a Telemark brand. They're not calling them Telemark AT skis or anything like that. They're saying, hey, these are Tele skis. I think that's badass because it takes risk. It takes heart, and it takes this idea that you are willing to help try to build something. And we have to create more spaces for that to happen. So that's what Freeheel Life was really about, And like for those that want a great opportunity, Telemark is there. I don't know if this is like a pitch, like I'm like, get involved with Telemark, everyone. No, but I mean, it truly is a great opportunity. But I always say, like, part of the problem I think in 2020 is people have this, like, I call it the Shark Tank mentality. People are like, if you've ever seen the show Shark Tank on TV, it's this idea like, I'm going to come up with an idea and I'm going to sell it for $1 million and I'm going to get investors and we're going to be global and we're going to scale up. And you've got all these hot words that you're using and it's amazing. Well, here's the thing. Telemark has great potential and great opportunity. Why? Because there's thousands and thousands, if not tens of thousands of us around the world that are interested in what we do, and we're passionate about it. And I think with as passionate of a group as we are, I think if we have the right equipment made by the right people, it's my hope that we'll be passionate about buying those products. And it's I don't know, some of you are going to think this makes sense, but it's just too much work, and I get it. I obviously personally have signed up for the long haul and making sure telemarketers are in control of the future and not someone else. And because if you love this thing as much as I do, you'll do anything to protect it and make sure that other people can experience it. And, I know there's a ton more to cover. I'm sure I'll get into this again along the way. Because these are the core beliefs of what drive me. They drive my business. They stoke me up every day. So I hope the next time that you're on freeheellife.com or Telemark Skier Magazine or any of our social media channels, you have a better understanding of what is fueling this and keeps things burning over here. Because these are the ideas that really have taken this thing from the beginning and moved it forward. And like I said, I didn't always think like this, but as time has gone on, and I always say this to my employees at Freeheel Life, when I hire someone here, I tell them, I say, this is an experiment and it could blow up at any second. And that's just part of the deal. It's also part of what makes it super fun because it's about problem solving. So I just want you guys to know more. I hopefully sharing that with you guys and opening up a little bit more about that. This stuff means so much to me and I get so pumped when I get to talk about it. And I hope that I was able to sort of lay it out in a way that made sense with some examples and some past history, and maybe help you understand a little bit more about why we do things the way we do at Freeheel Life and on Telemark Skier Magazine. And, I'm a big believer that this is a group effort, and, we're just kind of one cog in this little Telemark machine. But I know how passionate we all are about this thing, and I know that we know what it takes to put the work into just being a telemark skier. So whether you're someone who's got a cool idea for a telemark company, or even if you're just a telemark skier and you buy telemark products, I just want to encourage all of you out there moving forward, pay attention to where things are at and where our money's going and what businesses we're supporting. And especially in the climate today, with where things are at and maybe what things are going to look like in the coming fall and winter, it's incredibly important that we support the people that support us. And I'll leave you with that. Thank you for listening today. As always, you can donate to the podcast, paypal.me/freeheellife. Check out freeheellife.com, telemarkskier.com. And especially this time, I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Share with me what your thoughts are. Like them, like my ideas, hate them, whatever. Email me, podcast@freeheellife.com. Thank you for listening, everybody. And until next week, spread telemark always.